Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Laprie.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Laprie, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Today on episode 47, I'm going to be kicking off a 4-part series on feedback. But before I do that, I wanted to ask you for some feedback. So if you are on an Apple device or an iOS device and you are listening on Apple Podcasts, I would truly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and a review. It doesn't take long, and it really helps me know if I'm doing okay here or if there's something that you think that I can improve upon. And also, it really does help the discoverability of this podcast so that other new teachers can find it when they're searching for, beginning teacher podcasts or basically podcasts on teaching. So if you could take a moment to leave a rating and review, I would really, really appreciate that.
I'm Jethro Jones from Transformative Principal, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual hosts. Make sure you check out the other great podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com. And get ready because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
Now, as teachers, we constantly give feedback to our students. We usually do it verbally or written, and the intent is to help students improve and grow. However, when it comes to receiving feedback, well, that's a different monster. In our beginning years, we're required to receive it, right, in the form of evaluations. And of course, this can be scary because those evaluations are often tied to our ability to receive tenure and continue teaching at that school. And later on, when we're more, experienced, we actually bristle when we receive feedback because we don't feel that the person giving it is necessarily qualified enough to do that. Maybe we don't trust them, or we just don't think we need it. As someone who is really reflective, and I personally am okay with receiving feedback, I couldn't help but wonder how we got to this point where we feel that we're maybe too good for feedback, or how can we become better at asking for feedback and receiving it? So I'm doing a 4-part series where I'm going to discuss the different aspects of feedback. And so this is, from asking for it, how to optimally receive it, and that's really important, and even how to craft a better way for us to give feedback to our students. But first, today, I'm going to be discussing asking for feedback. And, asking can be super scary. I totally get it. I mean, asking for anything. I remember when I was little, I would be too scared to ask a waiter or a store clerk for something just because they were adults. And I was like, scary adults. And probably a lot of us were too afraid to ask someone if they liked us when we were younger. And it can even be thrilling or exciting and also terrifying to ask someone to marry you. But why is asking so inherently scary? And I think it's the fear of rejection or admonishment. So at some point, somebody squashed our tendency to be curious, and we were conditioned to stop asking, to stop being bothersome, to stop being so stupid. At this point, you probably know that teaching is so hard, right? I mean, you may even be wondering why you got into the profession. I mean, how can this get any easier? Well, one solution and one way to make it easier is to ask for feedback a lot and regularly until it's no longer scary to ask and it becomes normal. So first, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of feedback do we respond the best to? Do we prefer praise and acknowledgement, specifics on one aspect of something that we're doing, maybe some generalities. Keeping this in mind will help you phrase the ask. Also, studies have shown that depending on where you are in terms of experience, the kind of feedback that you need to move forward is different. So sooner in our career, we do need more praise and reassurance. And later on in our career, when we're more comfortable in our own skin and comfortable with what we're doing, we want more specific feedback on what to improve. All right, next. The feedback is only useful if it comes from actual observations of your performance. So, getting feedback on your teaching based on how you are in PLC, not so helpful. So this means that you're going to need to invite people to watch you teach, and that can be scary. However, the more people that watch you teach, the easier it gets. So in the beginning, you're going to feel nervous because there's another adult in the room, but the more times that you have another adult in the room, the easier it is to just ignore them completely and move on. Now, alternatively, if that just freaks you out too much, you can also record part of your lesson and ask someone to watch it. But just so you know, it can be hard for the observer to find time to do that. So you may have to keep reminding them, hey, did you get a chance to see that observation? So just be aware of that. And if you do go down this route, please only send them at most a 10-minute snippet that you want direct feedback on. Don't send them an entire hour to watch. It's really, really boring. No offense, but it's really, really boring to watch someone teach for a few hours. Okay. And at that point, they're going to be wondering, why did I sign up to do this? So just send them something short, something actionable that they can give you specific feedback on. So the act of asking for feedback can also be daunting, but I have to tell you, it makes you appear to be a proactive teacher and an eager learner. Nothing screams, I want to be a better teacher, than asking for good feedback. This isn't just isolated to when you're a new teacher either. It's even more helpful when you're more experienced. Because here's the thing, we get into a routine and sometimes even a rut because it's easier to do things the same way all of the time. The problem is that we may just be getting by with that same way that we've been doing, and a few tweaks can drastically improve our teaching. So when you do get the courage to ask, don't be afraid to ask about both the good and the needs improvement. So if your admin observed what you thought to be a successful lesson, ask them for feedback on an aspect that you know you nailed. So don't just say, how did it go? What do you think? Instead, ask, I know the station rotations were successful. Why do you think they worked so well? And that may seem to be a strange question to ask, but here's why. In our beginning years, we are going to try things that are new, and we're just going to cross our fingers and hope it goes well. And magically, it sometimes does. But why? Exactly which part worked? How can we replicate that part? It's hard to truly know when you're in the thick of it in teaching, so asking for the positive feedback from an observer can help you hone in on what you're doing well. Think about it. It's easier to repeat the good stuff, right? On the opposite side, don't ask generic and broad questions like, how am I doing? What can I do to improve my classroom management? How can I just improve in general as a teacher? How can I be a better teacher? I know you mean well, but these are difficult to answer, and a lot of times they're going to elicit unhelpful or generic advice. You don't want a bunch of generalisms. You want someone to give you specifics on how to become a better teacher or specifics on how to improve your classroom management. So the biggest part of this right now is the ask, how you phrase the ask. So you want to be specific and say something like, I noticed that students are generally on task during an activity, but things tend to fall apart during transitions and the kids take too long to refocus. How can I improve that? You see how that is super duper specific, not just the kids are out of control and I don't know what's going on. So you have to ask for specific feedback on specific aspects of your teaching. Now, Some questions will elicit feedback that will be helpful but difficult to hear. So questions like, I noticed that when I'm talking, very few students are looking up and paying attention to me. What do I need to do to fix that? Well, here's the thing. To answer that question, the receiver will need to make comments about your teaching style and delivery and how they perceive your rapport with the students. So I'm going to talk more about this in the third episode of this series, and I'm going to discuss how to take feedback without wanting to crawl into a hole. But for now, you just need to know that certain types of questions will require a more personal and sensitive answer. So be careful what you ask for. It doesn't mean that you should ask for it, but you should know ahead of time, the types of answers that you're going to get, and you need to make a plan for how you're going to take that. Now, in addition to asking for feedback on your performance, you could also ask more probing questions like how, what, and who questions. How would I do that? What would it look like? How would you do that instead? Who in our school does that so that I can observe? So it's one thing for the observer to tell you what you need to improve. As a new teacher, what you really need to know is how to improve. So don't be surprised also if your admin doesn't give you specifics. I mean, I'm just telling you the reality that they may have taught a different subject or grade, or they may not have been in the classroom for very long. I don't know if other teachers have told you this, but you don't have to be a great teacher to become an administrator. So if you feel like your admin is kind of hemming and hawing about how to answer that who, how, or what question, well, then ask for a recommendation of someone who can answer those questions. So during your evaluation, don't let your admin off the hook with giving you feedback, but no advice on how to implement or fix it. So if they are telling you your classroom management needs work, be sure to ask them, well, who do you consider to have good classroom management so that I can observe them and see what I can specifically do to improve? Or if they tell you that your student engagement isn't high enough, then ask them, who can I observe who does have good student engagement so that I can talk to them and get some advice? So if they can't tell you how to be more engaging or how to incorporate more collaborative work, well, be sure to ask them specifics and ask them who you can talk to and observe so that you can get a better idea of where your administrator is at. Each of them expects something different, so you need a better visual of what they want. Now, on a side note, if you truly are trying something new like stations, ask someone who's done them successfully to come and observe you. So another colleague. And ask them to watch the process, how you interact with students, how the students interact with the activity, etc. And then have them give you feedback on how to make it run smoothly next time. I mean, nobody expects you to be perfect or even good the first time you try something, but it can help to have a veteran guide you so that you can get to that good faster. So basically, guys, for today, getting feedback can be stressful, but the more you do it, the less stressful it becomes to ask and receive it. On my next episode in this series, I'm going to be talking about how to get feedback from students and also through data. So getting student data, either in the form of surveys or just talking to them, can be really helpful, especially if you teach, secondary. By this point, students know what makes or breaks a teacher. So you can use surveys or just elicit feedback that way from them. But also, I'm going to be talking about collecting data that you can use as feedback, sort of like being a scientist, to determine how you're doing with your teaching. So be sure to tune in next week for that episode. Thanks again for hanging out with me today, and have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.